Hello, everyone. It's Phil Jones, and joining me is Phil Boyle, and we are back again to talk about some common things we get asked. So, Phil, what do you want to talk about today?
I want to talk about color space, Phil. I want to talk about color space and specifically how it's relevant to buying a projector, what we should look for, and, you know, if any, which are the most important ones to look for. So let's talk about that.
Okay, yeah, because if you look at a lot of boxes, you'll see that a lot of those projectors will have, you know, supports 100% of DCI-P3 or 107% of the Rec 2020 color space. And the question is, what is it, and does it really matter? So,
and that's a good question. So let's start with the various ones. Let's talk about Rec 709. Tell everybody what Rec 709 is.
Basically, the way you look at color spaces, you'll see them represented as a triangle of colors from, you know, red, green, blue, like little points. Those are kind of like the main points in a triangle. And it's all of the colors in that triangle. Now, as the color gamut or color space gets bigger, the triangle gets bigger. So the point where red is a little further out, and green is a little further out, and blue is a little further out. So the color space gets, or the color gamut gets bigger. So Rec 709 is basically about 35% of what the human eye could actually see when it comes to color. And it may not seem like much, but it's actually a lot, because most material that's shot in SDR or HD utilizes that color space.
Right. Which is the majority of the material, honestly, that you can watch on a projector. It's going to be, you know, SDR content encoded in Rec 709 or older, but, you know.
Exactly. Now, you'll see, so if you're looking at old 3D, SDR, original 4K, HD material, most broadcasts is shot in Rec 709. So that's kind of the older standard. Now, in cinema, they use a wider color space, which is often called DCI-P3. So DCI-P3 was kind of something that they shot cinema material in. So that triangle is bigger. It represents about 53% of what the human eye can see. So it's a bigger triangle. It can show you more shades of red and more shades of blue and more shades of green and all of the different colors that fit inside of that triangle.
It's like your analogy, I'm going to steal it, that you always talk about. It's about a box. It's how many colors? It's about a big box of crayons. So, you know, DCI-P3 is just a bigger box of crayons. It's got more colors available to display.
Yeah,
if your projector can display it.
Exactly. It has a larger range. Now, a little later, we're getting to bit depth, because you can have a bigger triangle, but how many steps do you have is the bit depth. But when we talk about colors, it's what colors can I represent? And these are the colors, right? Now, that is actually a lot of the HDR material that you watch is actually mastered in DCI-P3. Because believe it or not, there's not a lot of displays that can go beyond that color space, even when they're mastering. So that's what they master the material in.
But wait a second. But there is other color spaces. For example, and this is a good one, BT 2020 or Rec 2020. Those are the same, right?
Yes. Now, when you look at HDR is designed to have capabilities that exceed the current display devices. Why? Because every time you turn around, it was like, okay, I got to make a new format because video displays have gotten better, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a video format that far exceeds what most displays can do when it comes to brightness range and when it comes to color capabilities. I'm going to build this format that goes beyond that. And that is where BT 2020 or Rec 2020 comes in. It can display about 75% of what the human eye can see. Now, the interesting thing is there's very few displays that can actually reproduce BT 2020, with the exception of basically tri-laser projectors. Most displays, including most flat panels, OLEDs, LCDs, can't display it, but there's actually projectors out there that can.
So you mentioned before SDR, Rec 709, but there's HDR content that's mastered in Rec 709 too, isn't there?
HDR material can be mastered in a wide range of color gamuts. Rec 709, DCI-P3, or even Rec 2020 or BT 2020. And then what makes it even more confusing is a lot of times what they'll do is they'll use the big container, the Rec 2020 container, to hold color that is actually mastered in DCI-P3. Like we mentioned, the goal of HDR is to have a big enough container to hold all of the data, So that means the color and the brightness information, right? Even 4K is to try to have enough detail to try to capture as much as I can off of the camera. Now, I may not need all of that detail. I may not need all of that brightness, and I may not need all of that color. So if I am drawing a stick figure in gray, guess what? I don't need 4K resolution. I don't need Rec 2020, and I don't need some massive amount of contrast and brightness range to do that. So the container can hold all of that. The question is, does the content have all of that built into it? So you can go out and buy a disc that is an HDR disc, and you'll see BT 2020, but the content's probably mastered in DCI-P3. That's probably going to be the most common way you're going to see it. So big container holding a smaller triangle.
And that's because, in a large part, that's because whether it's being shot on film or it's being shot on digital video, the reality is it's content like animated content that really pushes outside that color envelope. And can take advantage of the range of BT 2020. But the majority of the time they're still playing around, the DCI-P3 within that ballpark.
Well, there's multiple things going on there, Phil. The first thing is, what is the camera's capabilities, right?
Right.
If the camera can only capture DCI-P3 or a little bit above DCI-P3, that's what they can master in, because that's what the camera can capture. The next thing is, what is in the scene? So if I am sitting here and most of the colors that I have on will easily fit into the Rec 709 color space. I'm looking at my monitor, and this shirt that I'm wearing is actually correct on that monitor. I have wore shirts on shows where I look at the monitor, and what I see on the monitor is not what I'm wearing, and that's because the shirt color is outside the color range of Rec 709. Most of the stuff you see in nature kind of fits in either Rec 709 or at the most DCI-P3. Now there are some colors that go beyond that. The red of a London bus is an example of a color of red that is outside of the color range of DCI-P3. And the only way you would see it is if I had a BT 2020 display and I capture that content in BT 2020. But most of the colors you see in nature, for real, are not or can be represented in the smaller triangle. So a lot of times you may have these big projectors that have these amazing color capabilities. 107% of Rec 2020 or BT 2020, but the majority of the content has none of that type of color in it. And if you try to use all that color at the wrong time, you end up with colors that are artificial looking and do not look like they look like they look in nature. The reds are way too saturated. Blues are way too saturated. Everything looks unreal.
Okay, so I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you, for those people watching, then why so much talk about BT 2020 and or Rec 2020? Why so much talk about it?
Well, there's two parts to it. The first thing is for a consumer, it's buy once, cry once, right?
Right.
If you eventually you see 8K TVs, right? The reason why you buy an 8K TV is not because there's 8K content today, but hope maybe in the future there'll be 8K content in the future, and I don't want to buy a new TV. The same thing applies with these wider color spaces, that eventually if they do start grading at that level, I want to be able to utilize it.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that Rec 2020 or BT 2020 is going to carry us far forward into the future, even though we're kind of playing right now in the DCI-P3 sandbox primarily, or older. But BT 2020, while there is some content that can at least partially leverage it, and maybe in minimal cases fully leverage it, depending on the content, it is a future. It's technology that's designed for, to keep us moving forward.
Exactly. And it won't be the whole scene, people. So, for example, if you look behind me, there's a sign back there. See that red back there? Maybe that red would require BT 2020, and the rest of it may not. So It won't be every color is going to look better. It just means that there may be a color that right now cannot be represented properly on video or in a movie or on your display, now looks like it. So the goal is just to make sure that if I do come across a color that's outside of the DCI-P3 color range, I can actually reproduce it. But it doesn't mean that you're going to use it all the time for everything, and every time you watch a movie, you're going to see the benefit of having that wider color gamut.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Let me see if there's anything else I want to ask about. So, BT 2020 carries us into the future. You mentioned 8K. Obviously, 8K displays and projection, it's still very niche, but we're going to see more and more of it as we move, not so far off. And obviously, there are 8K flat panel displays. But BT 2020 and our Rec 2020, let's just say BT 2020, settle on one. That's also for 8K too. It's not changing anytime soon because it's more than enough.
Yeah, it's more. The color is going to be more than enough. Like I said, 70. It's more color than we've had available to us. And if no one goes to a cinema or watches sports at home and says, "Wow, that color looks lifeless and drab." So yeah, so so there's going to be more than enough color space for everyone. Like the first projectors that are doing these wide color spaces start off as laser TVs, because you can go out and buy a good tri-laser light source from a couple of different manufacturers that uses a red, green, and blue really defined laser to generate a massive amount of colors, huge amount, over 100%. Of Rec 2020 and Rec 2020 or BT 2020. The problem is knowing how to tame it, because remember, you have this projector that can do these huge amounts of color, but I don't need it. So the signal tells the projector show 100% of red, DCI-P3. The projector needs to know, hey, I can do 100% of BT 2020, but I shouldn't do that. The projector has to be smart enough to convert or map its colors down to utilize it properly. Remember, so if I'm watching an old TV show or a piece of broadcast in Rec 709, I want to see 100% of that red in Rec 709. And if I try to show you 100% of BT 2020 red, it's just going to look wrong. The challenge is, I got this gigantic box of crayons. Do I know how to map it down and utilize it properly? It's like giving a baby a crayon box with 1,000 colors in it, and they're going to grab the brightest red, green, and blue every single time and draw a picture. It's not going to look natural. So that's far more of a challenge. Sometimes having the wider color gamut is actually a problem for a projector versus a benefit.
And that leads me to my next question, which is, there are plenty of projectors out there. In fact, I think it's probably the majority of projectors that don't do BT 2020. Do I have to buy a projector that does BT 2020?
I will tell you that the most accurate projectors that we view, that we watch, that I've reviewed, most of them are still using blue laser phosphor or bulbs.
Right.
And they do a very, very, very good job of accurately reproducing colors in most movies. So a lot of times, if you're looking for accurate color in a scene, I would a lot of times maybe not gravitate towards a projector that has this fancy tri-laser light source. Yeah, that one shade of red back there may not be perfect, but my skin tone, the grays, the gray of my beard, the greens, the blues, everything else looks realistic. And I'd rather have 99.9% of the scene look accurate than be able to hit a color off in the distance. So a lot of times that's not the main reason why you look for a projector, is the ability to reproduce these wide colors. The question is, can you accurately reproduce colors in the content you're watching? Also, Phil, another factor that needs to be considered when we're talking about great color reproduction is color volume. When we see colors represented, often it's shown in that little triangle that we call color gamut. But color is actually a combination of the color gamut and how bright that color is represented. The triangle is just the base of the cube, but the height of that cube is how bright that color actually is. So think of it as Ferrari red in the shadows and Ferrari red in the sunlight. Both are the same color. One is just represented in a much brighter way. Often, if you look at Rec. 709 colors, if they're represented or delivered in high brightness, they still appear incredibly vibrant to your eye. A lot of cinema projectors have color filters to hit those wide color gamuts. However, it sacrifices brightness. And I have found in my viewing experience that often I would rather look at HDR in a smaller color gamut, but with higher brightness, because it looks more vibrant to my eye.
Because part of it is knowing what to look for, and you can't expect every customer who's buying a projector to know everything. That's why they come to our websites and they get our advice, they read our reviews and get our opinion. But often I say in reviews that I've done that a more neutral kind of color, a color that's not blown out, with nuclear greens and irradiated reds, that all looks good. Those hyper dense colors look really good in the short term, but if they're not tuned correctly with the content and everything, it can quickly become exhausting. And maybe because of the fact that we've got all this experience and we've been looking at these pictures for between the two of us decades, that the actually more accurate picture does look better, especially over the long term, versus those blown out colors that, well, like we used to say when we worked, in the CE business, about flat panel televisions that had, those hyper accentuated colors. They look great on the retail show floor. But when you get them in your home, it's just tiring. It's eye wearying, and it doesn't look natural.
Okay, so let's talk about two things. There's two things you hit there. The first thing, a lot of times manufacturers will grab super bright. Look how bright it is. Look how many colors I can reproduce. Look at these insane resolutions, because people try to buy stuff based on specs. So 4K must be better than 2K. 8K must be better than 4K. Rec. 2020 must be better than a projector that can only display DCI-P3. 6,000 lumens must be better than 4,000 lumens. And guess what?
Yeah.
The best looking projectors out there are 2,500 lumen, 80% DCI-P3 4K projectors. All of those specs really don't mean that you're going to get the best picture. It's just easier to sell if you go in there and you try to look at the specs, and the one with the bigger numbers for the same price is the one that I'm going to buy. So that's the first one. The next one, when it comes to these ultra wide, super bright colors, most of the time, if you look at it in the dark, it's just wrong. It's just the colors are off. But it's so funny. Just like you mentioned at retail, we used to go to retail stores and every TV has a vivid mode, and that vivid mode made it look really, really good under incandescent, super bright or fluorescent lights at a retail store. Well, I actually have a AWOL Vision projector here, the LT3500 Pro, And that can
Right.
display a massive amount of colors. Now, a lot of times I make sure when I switch that off, when I'm looking at it, when I'm looking at Rec 709 material in a room with low to no ambient light, right?
Right.
But when I take this into my other room on their 120-inch screen with a whole lot of ambient light, those oversaturated colors are actually helpful. It actually
Right.
helps the image look better and fight through the ambient light. So in a room with high ambient light, having artificially boosted colors actually makes the picture look better. You know, it doesn't look as
Right.
washed out. So there are points where we always say reference and preference. If the goal is to a lot of times to display it exactly the way the creator intended for you to see it, unless you don't like the way it looks. And then if
Right.
you want to boost the colors, go right ahead. So there are some benefits right now to BT 2020, especially on laser TVs, which are utilized in rooms with high ambient light. All right, so to summarize, there's multiple color spaces out there, and we only covered 3 of them. You'll hear other ones like sRGB and NTSC, but the main thing, remember, is content is normally mastered for your home, for Blu-ray or DVD or streaming service in either Rec 709, DCI-P3, or BT 2020 / Rec 2020, right? The BT 2020 Rec 2020 is kind of interchangeable, right? It means basically the same thing. So those are the 3 common color spaces. The wider color space represents more colors that your eye can see. You can Rec 2020 shows you more of the colors that you can see in nature. But just because you have more colors available, it all depends on what you're watching if those colors are going to be utilized. And a lot of content you're watching is not going to need such a wide amount of color to reproduce what's going on screen. If I'm watching neon or a London bus, every once in a while there will be a color that comes across that you may want or need Rec 2020. But most of the time when you're watching this stuff, DCI-P3 is probably more than enough, or even Rec 709. If you use a super bright color solution or tri-laser that can reproduce these colors, the question is, when you don't need those colors, can that projector accurately basically map everything itself down to accurately display the smaller triangles so things don't look artificial? And last but not least, even if you don't need that wide color, sometimes you may utilize it just to overcome things such as high ambient light on a laser TV. So Phil, anything else that I missed that you'd want to cover?
No, I think you hit it there. And I would just say the way that they're going to find that out is they need to go to www.projectorreviews.com, and they need to check out our reviews, because we talk about these things in all of our reviews. You know, specifically how these projectors perform in a variety of environments, not just our perfectly light controlled spaces. We will artificially introduce some of the uncontrolled light sources that exist primarily in the majority of spaces out there. Check out our reviews.
Yeah, focus on the majority of the picture. If a highlight is blown out in HDR over here, or that one color over there is not saturated 100%, that's not what you're looking at. You're looking at the entire scene. So the goal is you want the majority of the scene to look great. And if you get that, then you end up with a great picture. So that's it for today. And as we always mention, if you have more questions or comments, please put them in the chat below. So, Phil, thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Oh, I want to say one more thing. If there are specific subjects you want us to discuss in these in future videos, also put those down there just with your general questions as well. Just let us know, hey, talk about this in another video.
Exactly. And we could go in more detail when it comes to color space, but we just wanted to kind of brush across the top. All right? So
Okay.
take care, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.